today's lesson has to do with graphs again, representation of data. And you'll see on this first screen our vocabulary and the types of graphs we'll be looking at. Double bar graphs, also called side-by-side graphs, and stacked bar graphs. So look at this graph. It's an example of a side-by-side or double bar graph. As we know, bar graphs display information in a way that allows us to make comparisons, and that's what's happening on this graph. A double bar graph helps us to compare or present more than one kind of information. So if we look at this graph, we see that it has a title, donations. We see that the scale on the left is divided into units of $2 and it represents the donations. And the scale at the bottom, the horizontal, represents the names of the donors. Also, you'll notice that in a double bar graph or side-by-side graph, there is a key that gives you an information piece about what the colors represent. So the green bars represent the amount of donations to animal rights groups, and the bluish purple bar represents donations to arts education. So when we do a double bar graph, we need a title, we need labels on our axes, and we need a key to explain the colors on our graph or the markings. So here's another example of a double bar graph. The title, scores on a fractions test with and without preparation. The scores are on the side and they go in increments of 10. The names of the students are on the bottom. And we've got a key. Students who took the test without preparation, those are the orange bars. Students who tested with preparation, this is the green bar. And again, we can make conclusions. We can have a discussion about what the bars represent. We can answer the question, do students do better on their test with or without preparation, just by looking at this graph. Now I could make a double bar graph with data tables. If I were going to make a graph here, my title would be scores on a practice test and the actual test, very similar to the previous slide. We've got our student names. We have a pretest and the actual test. And my graph could look like this. Again, my title, my scores on the vertical axis, the names on the bottom, and then I would need to add my key for pretest and test. So now stop the video on this slide, look at the information, and prepare a bar graph that will represent the enrollment of 7th and 8th graders at a school in the years 2002 through 2005. So again, you're going to be creating a double bar graph with this information. You're going to have a title, you're going to label each of the axes, and you're going to have a key, and you'll prepare your graph and bring it to class. When you're done preparing your graph, begin the video again for a look at stacked graphs. Here is an example of a stacked graph. A stacked bar graph is a graph that is used to compare parts to a whole. The bars in a stacked bar graph are divided into categories, and each bar represents a total. So in this graph, each of the bars is divided into two categories, boys and girls, and each of the three bars represents the whole. So this is the favorite sport of grade 8 students, and if we look at this first bar, it's basketball. About 38 students like basketball, and of those 38, about 16 or 17 are girls. So again, we have a title, we have axis labeled, we've got a key. The difference is that the bar is stacked and it's comparing parts, girls and boys, to the whole. So we see the same thing with the sport of badminton And with volleyball, we see the total number and then we see the division of how many are girls and how many are boys. So take a look at this information. We've got the maximum marks scored in math for grades 6, 7, and 8 girls and boys. Let me move this one up a bit. So look at that information and then decide which of the graphs shows that information. Graph 1, 2, 3, or 4. Which one shows grade 6, 7, and 8 girls and boys and the total? When you come to class, we'll look at these graphs again. We'll have a discussion about which graph matches the data table. So today we had a discussion about another type of graph, a double bar graph and a stacked bar graph to represent our data.